You know how they say history is written by the victors? It usually focuses on the big names, the leaders, the professionals. But what about all the stories that just fall through the cracks? Well, today, we're going to dive into a book that's all about unearthing those hidden histories, and we'll do it through the incredible true story of one forgotten champion.
And that one line, that's really the heart of this whole thing, the mission behind the book Singapore Tamils 200. It's this simple but really profound idea that nobody's contribution should ever be forgotten, no matter how far they were from the spotlight.
So before we jump into the main story, let's just back up for a second and get a sense of what this project is all about. Because it's way more than just a book. It's like an act of historical rescue.
Okay, so this book documents the lives of 200 different people who helped build the Tamil community in Singapore. And what's really amazing is that this is just volume 1. The plan is to publish 4 more, to eventually tell the stories of 1,000 people. 1,000!
And this right here, this is what the book is all about. So much of the history we read is about the political and intellectual elite, right? But this project flips that script. It deliberately goes looking for those social organizers, those working-class heroes whose struggles were just as important but are rarely ever talked about.
And this is a really important point, how they define who's in the book. It's not some narrow definition based on race or where you're from. Nope, they include anyone from Indian, Chinese, and other communities who made a real contribution to Tamil language and culture in Singapore. It's just a really beautiful, inclusive way to look at history.
All right, so to really see this mission in action, let's go from the big picture to one specific story. A story that shows exactly why this kind of work is so critical. Let's talk about a man named Vengadachalam.
The story doesn't start with some grand ambition. It starts with pure desperation. Vengadachalam was born in a small village in India back in 1920. And like thousands of other young men at the time, he was forced to leave home for Singapore, just to escape the crushing poverty and famine that was happening under colonial rule. But, this new land was no paradise. He ended up as a manual laborer at the Singapore docks, doing the most brutal work imaginable, clearing forests, breaking stones. The conditions were so bad it was basically bonded servitude, and death was everywhere. So many workers died from malaria, snake bites, and disease.
But it's in this brutal, unforgiving environment that something remarkable starts to happen. This young, uneducated laborer begins to transform into a revolutionary, a man who would soon take on a new, much more powerful name, Iraniyan.
And here's the thing, he didn't have any formal schooling, but he started getting what the book calls an intellectual education from other activists around him, and he was just lit up by these huge ideas, by Karl Marx and communism, by Periyar's social reform movement, and of course, by the massive push for India's independence from Britain.
He wasn't that same person anymore. So, to mark this total transformation, he sheds his birth name. Vengadachalam, the laborer, was gone. And in his place stood Iraniyan, the revolutionary. It was a name that fit his new purpose.
I mean, just look at this timeline. His journey is just wild. Think about it. He gets to Singapore as a teenager, around 1934. During World War II, he's a soldier. By 1946, when he's only 26 years old, he is leading the single largest trade union in all of East Asia. And then, just 4 years later, he's dead, a martyr at 30. That's an entire world-changing life packed into just 16 years. It's unbelievable.
So the big question is, how on earth did he achieve so much so fast? Let's zoom in on the absolute peak of his power, when they called him the King of the Docks, and see exactly how he did it.
Okay, so picture this. At just 26, Iraniyan is the leader of the Singapore Port Workers Union. And it's not some small group. It has 12,000 members. It was the biggest, most powerful union in the entire region, and he was the one in charge.
But that brings up a huge problem, right? The docks were crawling with these ruthless criminal gangs who were exploiting the very workers he was supposed to be protecting. So how does a 26-year-old union boss go up against the entire criminal underworld?
The answer? It is simple. And it is absolutely brutal. He shot and killed 4 of their leaders. Just like that. That one act sent a message that nobody could ignore. They knew he was not a man you messed with. But here's what's so fascinating. It wasn't just about violence and fear. He was also a super strict social reformer, and his members revered him for it. He banned alcohol for union workers. He insisted their kids had to go to school. And he demanded total financial honesty. The union handled enormous amounts of money, and not a single cent ever went missing.
So you have this mix of fear and deep respect, and it created this insane level of loyalty. I mean, the killings of those gang leaders were actually investigated by the British Parliament, and yet not one single person ever betrayed him. Not one.
But a reign like that, as king of the docks, you just know it can't last forever. So let's turn to the final chapter of his life and see how his sacrifice brings us right back to the book's mission of remembering the forgotten.
In June of 1948, the whole political scene just changes overnight. The British declare what's called the Malayan Emergency, and they start cracking down hard on the unions. Now, Iraniyan could have just laid low, but instead he gives up all his power, returns to India, and keeps fighting for oppressed people there. Just 2 years later, he was betrayed and killed by the police.
And if you want a final kind of hauntingly symbolic detail, he was killed on May 5th, 1950. That was Karl Marx's birthday. It's just a crazy, poetic end for a man whose whole life was reshaped by those communist ideals.
And that's where we come full circle, you see? Iraniyan's incredible, violent, dramatic life is just one story out of the 200 that this book brings out of the shadows. One forgotten champion among hundreds whose legacies are finally being pulled back from the edges of history.
So it really makes you think, doesn't it? Iraniyan's story was almost lost for good. It makes you wonder whose stories from your own community, from your own history, are out there just waiting for someone to tell them.